I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. We live in a time when organizations around the world are being called on to transform themselves, to turn around their tendency to become corrupt and even bankrupt over time. If only we could find some leaders who could suggest some ways of transforming these organizations. Jim Ruff is one of those organizational experts. And just so it's not a surprise, I mean, if you've looked at my website, you are probably pretty darn clear that I think we've passed a critical mass of potential off-ramps that could have been a far less destructive imminent future. But I think you're right in reading that I'm extraordinarily open to conversations for possibility. And because the framing that I think has me want to stick with you in the conversation rather than walk away as the people you're just describing, is that, the punchline of my book and the punchline of really my woke moment through these past 7 years of building out a body of work is that, yes, we may have missed those off-ramps and things are not looking good for us on a large scale for salvaging much of this business as usual human operating system. The punchline is that I can think of no more important human endeavor right now than for each of us to discover the inner practices, usually psycho-spiritual practices, that will allow us to reconnect with the web of life and reconnect with deeper self, each other, earth, and soul. Because that's, the punchline is that's what got us into this predicament, is the disconnection.
Yes.
And what I've been really excited to speak with you about is really a couple of the things. I'm sure you've had many major projects in your life, but the two that I'm at least partially aware of are a particularly potent kind of facilitation. And so I'd love to hear whatever you might want to recall and mention about that chapter of what you've created, and then some more current endeavors that really seem like they speak very directly to reconnecting people with one another in an unusual way, in a way that I would probably nudge into the category of transformation based. So that's my guess from what little I understand of your body of work and a couple of elements of that body of work. And so, first, is that a safe thing for me to be saying, or am I off track?
No, that sounds great.
And would you be willing to just start us out with filling in the gaps for me? In obviously I've got a partial little fragmentary picture of what you've created, some quite potent ways of bringing people together on purpose, to have them be able to realize a depth of relatedness and a depth of effectiveness together that they might not have predicted before coming together and working with you. Is that, again, fair to say?
It is. Yeah, I'm realizing now that you have a real podcast, I looked at your website. I didn't find the podcast. I think I found a bunch of videos and started watching some, but not a podcast, I think.
Yeah,
So
the
I need to
podcast
go back and look at that.
the podcast is The Poetry of Predicament, and it's a YouTube channel. And
Okay.
on the website, I just have a few examples, a few episodes of the podcast, and a place to click on to be able to go and subscribe if you'd like, and so on. And that again happens. All the real action happens on YouTube for the
Okay.
podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm interested in some of the interviews you've done in the past, and
Yeah.
and some of the videos too. I started watching a little bit about South America, and I just skipped around. I didn't have much time, but very interesting.
Great. Well, Jim Ruff, I'm pleased to welcome you here to the Poetry of Predicament for this particular episode. And you, like quite a few people recently, have been introduced to me just through an email exchange with prior guests on the show. And to the person, it has always turned out to be a valuable exchange, a valuable introduction and suggestion. And I have a feeling that today will be no different from that trend. And so if you wouldn't mind just starting us out, letting us know a little bit about what got you into this business of crafting ways for people to come together in fruitful ways, and tell us a little bit about some of these elements that have made up your track record in doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's different starting points, but one of the starting points is that I got interested in creativity, and there was a conference that I used to go to every year called the Creative Problem Solving Institute in Buffalo, New York, usually. And it always occurred to me that if creativity really existed, human creativity, then we would apply it to impossible to solve problems like the ones we're facing today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people are ready to say, oh no, we can't do anything. We're an overshoot. We've passed the possibility. Well, in my mind, we haven't started thinking yet. How do we start thinking, and what is the quality of thinking that we need to be employing? And so I started with this Creative Problem Solving Institute, and that was largely about brainstorming and synectics and metaphorical thinking and holistic thinking and transformational thinking. And it was just wonderful for me to go back there every year. And I was on the faculty for maybe 20 years. But eventually I kind of got it that there's a way to facilitate people to face impossible to solve problems, and where they make progress. Maybe they don't solve the thing in the way they've framed it, but they have a breakthrough and they look at one another and think, holy smoke, wait a minute, we're starting to feel, like it's up to us to solve this. And like we have an angle, and how do we get going? And I was working in particular at the time I was a consultant, and I was an internal consultant in a sawmill or in a timber company. And I I was helping hourly employees to solve problems that they didn't think they could do anything about. And that was the theme song, is to let's pick something you don't think you can do anything about, and let's see if we can't come up with something. And that sometimes originally it was like, hey, we would need to fire the boss, or something like that. But what they really came to, then they would have a breakthrough or a number of breakthroughs, and they realize the boss isn't really the problem, it's the system. And then they'd start, even though the problem got bigger, they got more excited about solving it and got more empowered that they maybe could change the system. So they would go and down to the union hall and mess with things, and they go to management and mess with things, and lo and behold, we find ourselves celebrating that we were in a different management system, and the boss was a friend and a help, and not a something we wanted to person we wanted to get rid of. So, and then I left that environment, but I had some skills and ideas about how to help people solve impossible problems and how to facilitate that.
Was there a particular name for that kind of facilitation, Jim?
Well, it is now. It's called dynamic facilitation. But at the time, no. I thought I just had reinvented facilitation. But then I started teaching seminars on facilitation skills, and everybody that came said, wait a minute, this isn't facilitation. So it was like, oh, okay. And then I gave it a name, and that's a hard transition because your business tails off. People want to come learn facilitation skills. They didn't want to come learn dynamic facilitation skills, which was kind of something special. But I got over that hurdle, and eventually just began to realize that, I'm kind of got a tiger by the tail here. This actually works. And how do I bring this forward? I don't know, but the way it started happening, Dean, is that people would practice. When I started teaching seminars, people would practice on impossible to solve problems from society, because they were all from different parts of the country or whatever, and those were the problems they shared.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have breakthroughs on, big ticket items like inner city crime or healthcare or poverty or male-female relations or whatever. And and that kind of threw me off, because I wanted to be a facilitator. And what was happening is that actually I was holding all these insights, and I had something to bring forward. I had a strategy about how we could make substantive change in society that was evolving. And so that brought a second layer to what I was doing. One was dynamic facilitation, and then the other was, okay, well, how do we change? How do we transform society so that these problems go away?
And could you jump way ahead for us to give us what you're now calling this work? That it sounds like you're involving yourself with government agencies and at that kind of a level. Is there a name for this level of what you're putting together?
Yeah, we have a nonprofit called the Center for Wise Democracy, and it's actually jumping ahead of agencies and government entirely. In other words, most people, when they think of the possibilities of change, are imagining change within the existing system, like they'll go down in the street and demonstrate and get mad and demand change from elected officials. Well, elected officials are in the system, and there's not much prospect of success in that direction. And there's a whole nother, other directions are, individual transformation, which are obviously have to happen. All these things have to happen, and they're really good, but those are elements of the system, and it's not really addressing the system in my mind. So a lot of the issue for me has been that we have three potential system possibilities that are paramount. People mainly think of two, I think. One happened, we had a transformation through the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. I think of Copernicus, who basically said, hey, the Earth goes around the sun, it's not the other way around. And that sort of started the ball rolling of people beginning to get it that, wait a minute, truth doesn't come exclusively from the authorities. It's something we can discover. And so there was this scientific method that developed, and then the institutionalization of the scientific method in terms of like the US Constitution was trying to be rational and trying to put weight on the individual judgments of many people and through voting and so forth. And so that was one transformation from what I call the triangle system, which is hierarchical, to the box system, which is basically a social contract like the Constitution. But I'm really jumping around. I hope I tie it all together, but basically the triangle system was breaking down, and now the box system is breaking down. It's no news flash. It can't work. And we have to transition to a different system. And maybe we could do it much, much faster than going through a scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, which took about 300 years. Maybe we could just do it like in the next couple of years. And if we could, then everything's different. Then we have a way to solve impossible problems, that issues that look impossible today. And for one thing, that most of the problems that we have and that we're facing are caused by our box system, the system of the social contract where it sets up the rules of the game. And then there's this competitive process where people are, these special interests are competing. And that system cannot work when we become interdependent. When we can't have a competitive system like in economics and in governance and in justice and in education and whatever. We can't have a system based on competition when we are interdependent. The competition basis only works if we are independent. So naturally, we're going to trash the planet. Naturally, we will destroy our own people because we have a system that dictates that. So if you and I can facilitate a transformation of the system from the box to the circle, which is what I call it, to where there's a different quality of thinking that actually is how we determine truth, if you will. In other words, we're all visiting together and saying, oh yeah, let's face this, let's not trash the planet. We'd probably all come to that conclusion. It's unanimous. We don't want to trash the planet. And we could make changes to not do that. Well, gee, if we could have that, if you and I can facilitate that conversation, that global conversation where all the people have that awakening and all the people create wise, responsible choices that we're going to go ahead and do, and we direct or lead governments, national governments, local governments, institutions, corporations. We provide leadership to those corporations. Well, we're in a different world. Maybe we can solve these problems. And maybe the solution, is pretty simple. In fact, just the fact that we're talking this way goes a long way to solving these problems.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I don't at all want to put you on the spot because
put me on the spot. I'm okay with it.
Okay. Well, since moment one, when you started describing what your work is about and the transition between triangle to box or square to circle, I go right to a very current news item that I've been tracking pretty closely. As you and I are talking in a time right in the middle of the George Floyd memorial protests that
funerals today.
an extraordinary transformation of an otherwise really fallow and apathetic American public for decades now, on average. So it's quite an extraordinary time that you and I are speaking in right this moment. I've been craving this moment for quite some time now, and it obviously is full of tragedy and for some despair and seemingly impossible predicaments that at every turn and on and on. The one I'd just like to bring up, because perhaps it would give us something to be able to put a little meat on the bones of what you're describing. And of course, it's all going to be just something that you and I imagine, because we're not in Minneapolis, but the city council of Minneapolis has declared that they're going to take apart, dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department and transform it, build it back out from zero, and do something very similar to what I heard you suggesting, which is, what if we could take this impossible situation, this problem, and find a way to bring it to a completely unrecognizable and unpredictable outcome through our working together, our being together in a particular way. That those words seem to be, slightly different jargon, but that seemed to be what the city council person that I heard speaking today about this really declaration and project that they've taken on. This is happening in Minneapolis. They're doing it. I'm curious if you could imagine, if you were to be a part of that and to be bringing pieces of what you're talking about, or if you could imagine this going into the process work that you do. Could you take us through how some of that might play out?
Sure, thank you. In fact, I've thought about writing them and making a proposal and stuff, but I realize they're busy and I've got 2 new set of ideas, so it's not gonna have traction. But to me, the issue is the problem that we're facing is caused by the box system. In other words, we have a system where the police, their job is to just, in theory, they don't make the laws, they just enforce them. They capture people and take them in and so forth. There's a yes, no about this. Are you following the law or not? There's a judgment that happens. And we use the word decision. The system that we have is a decision-making system. D means, at its root, it means away, and scission means to cut. It means to cut away. It really is, our process of thinking is about judgment and cutting away the minority people, the minority viewpoints, our feelings, our intuitions. We're trying to be rational. We're pretending to ourselves we have this rational system. And so we cut away the minority. And if we solve this problem with racism somehow, this is not of course, this is about the 6th time the city council or city councils have tried to reorganize and cut away and defund the government and stuff. The police. It's not a workable model in my mind. It works in the sense of making things better, but it's not workable. There are still special interests out there, the police union or the right wing, who hasn't spoken. We have a political battle. It's all structured. and it just swings back and forth. And it's not like we didn't get to the place outside of the box to figure out what we all want and how we're going to do it. This is not you and me facilitating all the people of Minnesota or Minneapolis to come together about what kind of police service they want and have everybody co-design what needs to happen and what they want, and have the police receive regular leadership from the public. They're not doing that. I mean, they can't do that because they're in the political game. There's a political game being played, and that is our system, and it causes the problems, and they are still in the game. They're just trying their best to make little rule changes that might affect things a little bit to the better. And
Right.
they're seizing the moment because normally they're paralyzed. They can't do it. But now there's this crisis and the people in the streets and everything. So they're seizing the moment to try and, as much as they possibly can, grab a little bit of change and push it into existence. But the other special interests haven't spoken yet, and they're going to step up and fight. And it's going to be an ugly mess, just like normal. This
Right.
is not, to me, this is normal. It's not
Sure.
really a thing.
So it seems like some of the words that I might have used in earlier conversations about facilitation and so on is that you're describing a we space, one in which everyone is included, all the stakeholders are included,
Yes.
and collaborating, co-creating whatever it is that they're after, as opposed to an oppositional space in which each side is bargaining for their, for the benefits that they see and feel and need, and really it's got to be a zero-sum game, so everybody's fighting hard to be able to get their piece of the
becomes
pie.
a lose-lose. It becomes a lose-lose. Now, it isn't just a zero-sum, it's worse.
Right.
but,
Right.
but yes. But the key in how this can happen is in understanding that there's a different kind of thinking. There is a quality of thinking in all of us that sometimes comes out, like in a crisis, which we don't have that genuine crisis right now because it's still in the blue team. It's not really a whole system crisis. It's the blue anti-racism group that's upset right now. It's not the whole system. But sometimes it is the whole system, and everyone then has a moment to maybe make a substantive change, and that is outside the system. There's that we space that can happen. And I'm calling that kind of the opposite of decision making. I call it choice creating. In other words, there's quality of thinking is where we're all somehow stepping back and we're looking at the problem together, and we're in relationship, and we're being authentic, and we're thinking from the heart and the top of the head, and whatever we say is somehow okay. And we are really seeking something better than I walked in the door with, rather than I want a win-win that everybody's excited about. That quality of thinking is almost outlawed in our current box system.
Yeah. So I'm can you say a little bit more about the distinction between choice and decision in the model that you're talking about? So what is the threshold that seems to be necessary? You were saying about when it's only one of the involved parties that's really inflamed about something. It's not everybody yet. So could you just define a little bit more about what is that threshold that you're seeing that really helps to bring forth this choice as opposed to decision dynamic? could you describe a little bit more about the threshold, and then just a little bit more about the distinction between what is it to decide, to have a decision-making process versus a choice-making process?
What is creating? Yeah, the a decision is made through judgment. It's a cutting away of like the five options. We weigh the options and then we judge. And our system, the box, the constitutional system that you and I were born into, is designed to be that. A bunch of individual judgments that get added up, and then we're supposed to get in line with whatever that came up to be. But in a choice, that's a created enterprise. Judgment and creativity are kind of opposites. If you are trying to be creative and there's judgment in the room, it's just, you can't do it. It's just going to be undermined. So when we are in the space of creating the choice, it's a different kind of zone of thinking. And what has to happen, see, if this, let's say all these, these demonstrators, they demonstrate, and the people, like the city council says, oh yes, we're going to do this, and we have a majority 9-7 or something, and okay, they put that into place. You're still in the system. The only thing they can really do is come up with some new policy of some kind, and there's going to be a resistance. There's going to be the resistive elements are going to raise money and do battle. So they're obviously not in this space of choice, of creating the choice, because they've got this segment of the population that's all animated, but it's not going to, it can't go anywhere. I mean, it can go where, might change the policy, but we've got bigger problems than that. Changing policy cannot deal with some of the problems we have. In fact, they sort of create the problems because they set the rules of the game up, and then everybody stays in the space of self-interest and they compete, and we end up with things like climate change and poverty and just ridiculous stuff that if we could stop and think in this choice creating zone of thinking holistically, well, we wouldn't want that. Even the rich people would say, no, I don't want to be way richer than everybody else. I mean, I want to, but if we're in the game, if that's the ultimate, if that's the ground floor, we're sort of stuck. You have to keep playing, I get plastic containers every time I order out. My wife died recently. It's painful for me to throw those away and the garbage, whatever. I have to play the game. I'm in it. And there's no we going, hey, this is crazy. Let's not pollute the planet,
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is possible to do, is to facilitate that whole system, choice creating conversation that is ongoing, which means that it's actually a structural change to how we think and talk and make decisions, only we're creating the choices.
Yeah. Jim, it sounds like in my listening to your layout of this type of facilitation and this kind of choice creating dynamic, it sounds like the beating heart of this working is to be able to engage people from the traditional box format that is in every agency and every organization around the world, but let's just talk about the USA for the moment.
Yes.
And you're describing some way of having people loosen their grip on that very familiar competition-based, zero-sum, aggression-based, polarized-based dynamic and system. I'm curious, can you share a little bit about
How
what
that
you've
could possibly
seen,
happen.
what you've seen that helps to loosen that grip and soften the view of the others in the room, and to find a way to include rather than obviously exclude and polarize in the room, which is the natural dynamic when especially when an organization is in trouble, people really dig in tough. So I'm curious, can you speak to a little bit about what softens that dynamic, and what eases up or reduces the amount of polarization? What brings people closer together in the way you're describing?
Yes. So when we use dynamic facilitation in a room full of people who might normally be in conflict, basically we arrange the room as a half circle facing a wall, and the wall has like 4 charts on it, or at least. And whatever, we don't have guidelines. We're not asking people to self-control, and we're not asking. Uh, we want people to just speak however they want to speak, whether it's adversarial or whatever, that's okay. But we restructure the context of the room so that whatever they say is included and accepted and valued as part of what we're doing here. And so if somebody wants to be adversarial and say, that's a pile of junk you're saying, they're looking at me, the facilitator, or the dynamic facilitator, and the wall, and we include that as a concern that they have, that maybe this is a pile of junk, and what would be better. And we're just taking people at where we're taking them where they are, and we're helping them all face this problem together that includes all the parts of each of us, and movement happens. There are shifts and breakthroughs along the way, and people leave the room together like this.
Yeah.
I mean, you get enough time, you need time, but I mean, people are excited about what we discovered, and
Yeah.
the problem often, almost always, changes, and the best strategy going forward is clear to all of us, and it's evolving. The next time we meet, everything may change again, but there's this evolving together of where we're going, and it's a we that emerges.
Right. So
And let me say one more thing, Dean.
yeah.
And the other piece of this is that this kind of thinking, choice creating, is resonant. And this group comes and tells its story of where it started and where it went. Anybody who hears goes, yeah, a very quick way to reach a large population of people, not just a small room.
It's a big jump that I just needed to do in just listening with you. And I can appreciate that. We only have, roughly an hour to do this whole conversation, but it's a big jump between inviting folks at the beginning to just speak what's true for them, and to include that, to put it up as like brainstorming fashion, like, here are core pieces of my point of view, our point of view. I'm the police union, for instance, and this is the way we see it. And I'm from the citizens board that's a part of this process, and I think you guys are insane and cruel and need to be eliminated and blah blah blah. So everybody gets their chance to put up even the toughest things to say and the toughest things to hear. They all get included. And I'm guessing that there must be some amount of reflective listening, perhaps down to getting pairs of people from opposite sides of the issue, and to be able to reflectively listen with one another, sometimes called empathy circles, and so many other things. I can imagine a bit of closeness and a bit of mutual understanding coming from a simple exercise like that. I've also seen some pretty profound results out of an exercise where, if I'm a member of the police union, my assignment in this next exercise is to take on creating what I think the most powerful argument for the other side might be. And their opportunity in this is to do the same by imagining what would be the strongest argument I might have representing the union. Is that making sense how I'm saying it?
Well, I've been a part of some of that, but that's not dynamic facilitation. We don't do that. You're imagining that there's these sides
Mm-hmm.
in the room. We don't imagine that. We're taking, and we don't have anybody representing anything. We just get people. So everybody in the room is an authentic person, and we're helping them speak from their authentic selves. Nobody is a representative of anything. And we're just people gathered in a room trying to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And and it's it's the group of us. And what begins to happen is that people get it, that this different point of view actually helps. I mean, it's like we're getting somewhere that I couldn't have gotten without those guys being so different. Mm-hmm. And so there's this awakening to this win-win possibility that's coming alive, and excitement about who's in the room. Mm-hmm. People don't see the process usually. They can't notice that we're in a different process of thinking, but they sort of ascribe it to the people, like, oh my God, how do we get these people in the room? But it really, what we have a process called the Wisdom Council process that has been accepted and tried, especially in Europe. We know it works at very large scale, and it could work globally fast. And what we do is we randomly select people from the population, say of Minnesota, or Minneapolis, where we were talking a minute ago. We would randomly select a few citizens, maybe 12 to 16, 10 to 16 citizens, and then we would dynamically facilitate them about this issue. We wouldn't define the problem. It would just be this issue. And then people would just speak and talk and whatever, and they would meet for maybe a day and a half. And at the end of that, they would be in unity. And they'd be excited about one another and what they came up with.
Right.
And then we'd have them walk on stage, and invite the community and also the broadcast media, and they would tell the story of where they went and what they came up with. And they're done. Now the citizens, the elected leaders, whatever in the room, turn their chairs and talk in small groups. And generally the answer, what they come up with is, yeah, we think so too. Mm-hmm. And so in a very, very, very short time, just a weekend, we've got almost unity in the whole city about what needs to happen in this situation. And then in a month or 6 weeks or something, we have another different random group. And they meet, and we go through the step a little bit farther, and we say, how did things go after that last one? Did we do something else? And what you're really getting is a very short dedication of time from the people of the city, but the people of the city are actually taking charge. Mm-hmm. And so we, the people, providing responsible leadership to government, to the police union, to the elected officials, to or corporations, to the whole thing. In other words, if there is no voice of the public interest today, it doesn't exist. And there has to be. How do we think, how do we solve these problems without working toward the public interest? We don't have that. We just have a fight between these special interests. And most of them are trying to make money. That's all they're doing. They hire people to, your son and my son get hired to give up their life energy to help this group of stakeholders make more money. This is a crazy way to run things. But you and I can change that if we facilitate this whole system conversation. Well, then all of a sudden, the people can make substantive changes. We can actually turn around some of these impossible to solve problems.
Yeah. I'm curious, Jim, either with this, I don't really know what to call would you remind me again what this facilitation at the level of agencies and like that is, what you're calling that?
There's 4 social innovations, okay? One is choice creating, which is quality of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to, in my next life, I'd like to come back as an educator and help kids to learn that.
Mm-hmm.
But the next level is dynamic facilitation. And that's for small groups. And the next level is the wisdom council process, which is for large systems of people. And then there's a final level, which I call society's breakthrough, which is just the wisdom council process, except applied to globally or nationally. And what happens then, in that, often people become afraid. There's a pulling away when you start talking about transforming the ground that people are standing on. You and I were born into a system of thinking. And this would, like I was talking earlier, the whole Copernican revolution to the scientific method and the constitutional democracies and social contract. And well, we need to go to the next level. And that is a scary movement. And yet, I think it has to happen in the short term.
Got it. Would you say again what that global level?
I call it society's breakthrough. That's because that was the title of my book.
Got it. And you're mentioning about books. Really, that's, I think, the next place that I'm wanting to go, and perhaps folks who are watching, could you point us toward any books, articles, videos, that sort of thing that we might be able to do a bit of a deeper dive than just this first layer that you're sharing with us?
The website wisedemocracy.org. That's the Center for Wise Democracy. And I just got an email yesterday from a woman in Munich who said she has a really bad backache and had to lay down for like a week, and she binge watched from the website. So she's all turned on. I hope everybody gets a backache.
Yeah. All right.
But and then I wrote a book almost 20 years ago, 17 years ago, called Society's Breakthrough: Releasing Essential Wisdom and Virtue in All the People. And at the time, I thought all this transformation required a US constitutional amendment. And I didn't understand that the magic sauce wasn't to creating a legitimate we the people. The magic sauce isn't the former we the people blessing all this, which would be a constitutional amendment. The magic sauce is choice creating. That the founders were in a choice creating conversation, basically. They were not seeking a majority. They wanted unity among all the delegates to the Constitutional Convention, among all the states, among all the citizens. Of course, they didn't, there's limits to that, but but they were really in a 4-month conversation, and a guy named George Washington was basically holding space. He didn't say anything. Pretty amazing. He was supposed to be king and he didn't say anything. He just held space for this to happen. I'm blown away by that lucky stroke that happened way back then. But, it's out of date now. It can't work. So we have to do that now.
I got it. And Jim, I have an odd question for you as I feel like our envelope of time is just starting to close up. And it's a variation on a question that I ask most folks in these conversations. And that is, if I'm a person that been raised in all the box methodologies, that's all I've ever known.
Me too. Yeah.
And I'm a guy that's had a number of jobs, few corporate jobs, even tried to do my own business for a while, been through the ups and downs of what seems to be the traditional difficulties of getting along with people and having organizations that work and so on. So I don't really know. Again, I'm just imagining myself in this role, which is mostly true. So if I'm in this role of being a guy that's all I ever knew, that's all I've ever known. But when I hear this guy Jim Ruff talk, I hear him describe how messed up stuff is and how there are some other ways to do things that might bring about some really different results. Like there might just be a way to create some new ways for our community to be, or different ways for the agency or the organization to do things and be things that I can't imagine right now. Are there some suggestions you could give to me, this average guy, that I'm kind of intrigued by these possibilities that you're talking about? What are some ways I could start to deepen my skills or my ability to really understand what you're talking about? And how can I become a little bit more adept and a little bit less stuck in the grip of the box way of doing things? How can I start to get a little closer to the limberness that you seem to be talking about with these groups that could do that kind of facilitation, that kind of process work?
Great question. Yeah. My wife died about a year ago, almost exactly. And so I'm kind of been knocked off my pattern, but we do these 3-day seminars, and that is really, you don't need everybody, but there's a number of people out there that just kind of take to this like a fish to water, I think. And and the times play a role too, as things get more desperate. You're not just, but in the seminar, and right now there aren't that many that are scheduled, although I think other people, there are some in Europe. And of course with COVID-19, we're really in the back. But we've been doing some in Santa Cruz because there's some experiments happening with the Wisdom Council there. And the Wisdom Council process has been adopted into the constitution of 2 states of Austria. So we've been doing seminars in Europe and in Germany and Austria. When I was bringing this forward, it's sort of surprising to me, but anybody who speaks German seems to be nodding vigorously while other people back away. I don't quite understand that. But I really would like, I think the Center for Wise Democracy is kind of building to a place where hopefully we'll provide I'm thinking of providing some kind of weekly or bi-weekly talk or something, where people, and invite people in who teach dynamic facilitation or lessons or something. I just have to get over this period of grief, honestly, is
Sure.
what's happening with me. But I would like, uh, I, I invite people that, of course, contact me too. If you look at the website and go, holy smoke, this has to happen, which is the response I expect, then yeah, be sure and contact us, and we'll try and, if there are people out there wanting stuff, we have people that would love to support them. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's true. Yeah. And but it's a great question, and a lot of it, is kind of explained in the website,
Mm-hmm.
and the story of this development, and there's a lot of videos, not just by me, but by lots of people and stuff. So I just got a new one this morning about comparing the Citizens Assembly, which is what
Yes.
the Extinction Rebellion group is doing, compared to the Wisdom Council process. And I don't think there's any comparison, really, especially if you're dealing with global problems. The Citizens Assembly is staying in the box, basically trying to influence the box, which is good. It's awesome. It's great. It's wonderful. But we have to get out of the box. We have to get to that place of we, the people with agency and feeling empowered, providing the leadership,
Mm-hmm.
rather than expecting to influence the decision makers. That's the basic difference. Is we're trying to influence the decision maker. They can't make any difference. Look at Congress. They're stuck. They're paralyzed.
Right.
That's not going to do it. Yeah.
Well, I something tells me that might be a good seed to plant for a future conversation that we might have, because
Sure.
my understanding of the Citizens Assembly, ideally, there's no one picture of it, but what I understand to be sort of the ideal, the aspirational ideal, is to, in fact, empower the Citizens Assembly to be a governing body. So, there might be more overlap with your Wisdom Council than you think. But again, that might be, it
Yeah.
seems like it deserves far more time than we have
Yeah.
here in these few minutes
Yeah.
remaining.
The difficulty, I'll just say briefly, is that
Yeah.
there's this field called deliberative democracy. And if we're thinking deliberation, you're in the field of judgment. You're trying to weigh the options that you've been presented, and you're discussing and weighing. None of that is happening in the Wisdom Council process. We're in this place of choice creating, not decision making. And we're seeking unity, and empowered unity that all of us are on board with. And when that happens, we're on a different planet.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Well, it seems like there is definitely a second round of this conversation to deepen a few of these pieces.
Yeah.
I would really appreciate that. And if I may, I'd like to also plant the seed for, first I want to just loop back a few minutes ago that you were sharing just briefly that you are still very much in the grief process with having lost your wife. And I'm very sorry for your loss. And I'm also moved that we are in a time of immense loss on this planet. And
Yes.
I'm actually very present in my own process right now to immense loss from the COVID, 100,000, 110,000 people now in the States having died. The existential level loss of habitat, of Earth systems at the hand of humanity in the past 40 years. And, really the human caused collapse of Earth and human systems that's going on. It's hard to overstate the amount of grief that is certainly in the ambient environment. Now, how much any of us on average, is really allowing ourselves to feel that is a whole nother question. And the seed I'd like to plant for hopefully another layer, another level of conversation, a deepening of this conversation sometime soon, is how that opening to that grief together might influence, hopefully in a good way, this process of shifting from the box attributes and atmosphere to the circle attributes and atmosphere, and the choice creation, which sounds like far more of a presence, far more of an embodied, in the moment, shared reality in the circle, as opposed to polarized, competitive strategizing and judging, as you're saying. In my experience, when we allow ourselves to grieve, especially grieving together, there's an extraordinary possibility for bonding and for new ways of experiencing one another and ourselves. So I'd like to just kind of plant that seed for a later conversation, the next, for our choice creation conversation or our
Sure.
wisdom council exploration 2.0 that we might get to speak about.
That's great. I really enjoyed your question. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Jim, thank you for your work. I really look forward to continuing to pull on this thread with you, this conversation thread, and this new possibilities thread, because it's clear that there's never been a time that we needed it more.
Yeah, this is a good news message. I mean, it's so strange that people pull away from it. It's the weirdest thing to me. Nobody's ever actually come up with a downside. I mean, nobody's mentioned one. Yeah. But it's like, I got to go do something else, rather than follow through about it. And, but it's tipping finally. I mean, at least in Europe, it's really moving forward. And we haven't, I don't know, 8 or 10 years of experience with it at the state level in Vorarlberg. It's one of the 9 states of Austria. Mm-hmm. And every state in Austria has experimented with the Wisdom Council process. So anyway, I don't mean to start off on a new thing, but I just want to say, hey, this is good news. This is not the usual, hey, we're terminal here. I mean, we are terminal maybe, but maybe we haven't started thinking yet.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I will be sure to put all the links and the names of the books and so on that you've mentioned in the show notes for this particular interview. And just thank you so much for your work and for taking time to speak with us today. It's really good to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Dean.
I look forward to speaking with you next time.
Okay, good.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.